Welcome to the Wenda Evangelistic Meetings. May God be blessing you. Hope you're in good health, spiritually being fed. And so we were speaking last concerning this 2,300 days. Under 2,300 days then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now this was said in relation to this little horn power. So it's talking about the dark ages in which Bibles were burned, people were burnt at the stake, people were left in lime pits to die, and they died for the truth. And then after this period of time, we come to 1844, and we have this judgment is set. The judgment, as we know it, is up in the heavens above, and it takes place as Christ moves from one apartment to another apartment, the second apartment, in which the judgment, in which names come up, in which people are candidates for eternal life or eternal destruction, according to the choices that they made. And our choice is to be one on who we know, having a close relationship with Him. Now, Christ couldn't come again when there wasn't a restoration of truth, when the prophecies were not understood properly. Now, as we spoke of, God is manifest to a commandment-keeping people. And to that point, these special truths concerning the judgment, concerning His law and the Sabbath, concerning the gospel, concerning the state of the dead and His second coming, had not come to light. And these were to be presented before the whole world, before His coming. And it was going to conclude, the whole issue was going to conclude in a much spectacular fashion, as one leader is pitted against the other leader, and the people of the world are brought to make a choice. There was a tremendous movement, as I say, in understanding the prophecies. Here's an image, a cartoon from the day, and thousands of people came, listened to lectures. There was a stir in the interest of the prophecies, and where there's smoke, there's fire. And so we had what is called the Great Disappointment. But then they had to look and search again. And in Revelation 10, we spoke of this little book that was sealed to the time of the end. But then what happened is the angel instructed John, go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel, which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel, and I said unto him, give me the little book. And he said unto me, take it and eat it, and it shall be in thy belly bitter, but in thy mouth as sweet as honey. And when he took that little book, that is what happened. It was in my mouth sweet as honey. As soon as I'd eaten it, my belly was bitter. And then he said, thou must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. And this is exactly the same experience that the disciples had. Though Christ said time and time again what would happen, they were unprepared for the event of His death. And so we have a similar situation. Because of the tradition of ages, because of false teachings over time, the people were not prepared to receive God at that time. They must go again and be educated in the truth and be able to speak that, prophesy to nations, kindred, tongues and people, to really be ready for the second coming of Jesus. Now we're venturing into our time, but we're not quite there. But we're coming to our day, and you can see the modern picture there. 7 days in Bible prophecy, and this particular prophecies that we're looking at is in Revelation 13. It says there in Revelation 12 about a woman. She's clothed with the sun and has the moon underneath her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Now it's talking about the church, the woman, the pure church, and what happens is that the dragon attacks that church, as you can see in the picture, and it says there in verse 3, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon its head. So it's identified, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So of this woman, the doctrine and teaching is pure. It says, take heed unto the doctrine and unto thyself, that you might save yourself and others that hear you. Since she has pledged herself to her husband, the woman, talking about to the church, to Christ, but she is under the attack of the dragon. In Malachi 4, 1 and 2, it talks about the Son of Righteousness arising with healing in his wings. Remember, the woman is clothed with the sun. She has the brightness of the New Testament, in which Christ gave testimony, and the Old Testament is the foundation underneath her feet, speaking of the moon. The woman is the church. In 2 Corinthians 11 verse 2, it says, for I have espoused you one husband. It talks about a chaste virgin to Christ. In Jeremiah 6 verse 2, it talks about the daughter of Zion, a comely and delicate woman. And in Revelation 12, there 4 to 6, it talks about the dragon, how he drew a third part of the stars of heaven, talking about the angels that he took with him when he fell, when he rebelled against God in heaven. And then it said how the woman, because of the attack of the dragon, fled into the wilderness. So we can identify this church over this over a period of time, prophetic period of time, in which the woman had to flee into the wilderness. So the church we can identify because they were found in caves and dungeons and in remote areas over this dark period, over the Dark Ages, whereas there was the church and state, which was a persecuting power. It says they loved not their lives to death, and so there were many martyrs as the church looked to get rid of those that opposed them. The dragon went to make war with the remnant of his seed, with those that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So not only have the commandments given, but also they behave and act in a way that Jesus did. So that's given to you in that chapter. So here we are at pictures at 13. Those talking about the time in which we live, and we're coming up to an understanding of the current time. We can understand Revelation by these 3 powers that come up from the bottomless pit. We have the church, church and state, apostate Christianity. We have given here also atheism and Islam, the 3 powers from the bottomless pit. These are the munitions that wage war across the world, that are Satan's munitions. In the book Keys of This Blood it says this, for the competition, talking about the church, the church which is the church and state, for the competition about who will establish the first one world system. It is about who will hold and wield the dual power of authority. Notice what it says, dual power of authority and control over each of us. We are standing now at the face of the greatest historical confrontation, only 3 internationally based power structures for truly global hegemony. Those 3 powers at that time, they were talking about the Church of Rome and the USA and the USSR. This book, Keys of This Blood by Malachi Martin in 1990. And the competition was for the world, and there would be 3 reduced to 2. So we have this power that we spoke of before. We have the beast powers, then we come to this little horn power that come from the abomination of desolation. We hone in on this one that has a great mouth speaking great things. What great things is it saying? That it can forgive sins, that it has the authority to change the law of God concerning worship days and festivals. And here we have coming now into Revelation 13. As I stood upon the sand of the sea, I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns upon its horns. And so we come to this beast. This beast here, coming out from the sea, nations, kindreds, tongues, people, is it's an amalgamation of all that was made up here. I saw it had a body like unto a leopard, and the paw of a bear, and a mouth of a lion, and it had 10 horns and 10 crowns upon its horns. So we have that brought now into the Revelation, an amalgamation of all that was before. So what had developed back here in Daniel become this. Now this is given as this. All of those beasts put together. This is how this system has developed. This makes it the strongest of the 3 powers that arose out of the bottomless pit. And we can understand the wars in the world by these 3 powers as outlined in Scripture. And so we had the symbols that were given, waters, as we said, representing people, winds of strife, and the heads, horns, representing nations, kings, and kingdoms. Now the body of the leopard is pictured here, and this is from the Vatican Museum, and it's Greek philosophy which was brought into the church and mingled with Scripture. That's what contaminated the Scriptures. So this is the School of Athens by the famous artist Raphael. As we said, this beast power, the waters which thou saw, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. We spoke briefly about this, but this persecuting power continued until 1798. And at that time, Napoleon Law 8 kicked in, and it was asked that the head of this organisation, the Pope, would give up his state and his territory, and he said no. So what happened was that it was taken by force by Napoleon. Revelation 13, we see one of its heads wounded to death. But then it says the deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So one of the heads wounded, the Jesuits were abolished in July 21, 1773 by Pope Clement. And so at that time this was the Inquisition, so this was the beginning of the downfall. But according to the prophecy, the time finishing of the 1260 years of papal rule, it was from 508 when France gave it its power, and then France would take away its power in 1798. Here you have the 2,300 days extending just past that time. Here we are identified by the authority of Caesars and taken away also by law, so it's put in legislation and it's given 7 times. And there's the reference there. 538 to 1798, it had its own autonomy. It started as a baby here. Along the way there are ups and downs, but this is bringing us to another climax in modern time, pointing us to the very, very end. So let's look at the verse there, just to really sink back in our minds, because we're looking at Revelation 13. We said, the beast which I saw was like unto the leopard, his feet were with the feet of the bear, and his mouth with the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. Now, in Revelation 12, we're told that the dragon is Satan. Now I saw one of its heads was wounded to death, and its deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So we have this date, 1798, in which its power was taken away, its autonomy was taken away from it, and it lost its power, its estate. One of its heads was wounded with the deadly wound. It started out with this ability, the law of the church and the state against heretics, particularly Arians, those who believed different to it, the removal of a pope of Arian persuasion. The emperor gave Rome civil power. And so a Pope Silverius, he was accused of plotting with the Goths, and he was deposed, and another pope put in his place by Justinian the emperor. But this was the beginning of the time of its authority, in which it became a persecuting Trinitarian power. We were told that 3 of the powers were rooted up by the roots, and this was Arian kings and powers, Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. They become extinct when it took control. So we have the Tiber River here, and before the Milvian Bridge battle, it was Constantine and his army. Constantine saw a cross of light in the sky above the sun with the words in Greek that are generally translated in Latin as "in this sign conquer." So this was a sign to him that if God would be with him, that he would change his allegiance to the Christian faith. That night, Constantine had a dream in which Christ told him he should use the sign of the cross against his enemies. So Constantine baptized his army, as Clovis, the king of the Franks, would later do, and so we had the beginning of that which had been more pure being contaminated by the power of the state. We said in Daniel 7 verse 25, "He shall speak great words against the Most High, and wear out the saints of the Most High, and thinks to change times and laws. And it will be given into his hand times, and the dividing of times, the 1260 years of its reign." Time, 1 year, times 2 years, and half a time, half a year, 3.5 years. And so this is mentioned here, this time prophecy in Daniel 7:25, and as I said, it's given 7 times. Easter Sunday, instead of the lunar day, was the day that Rome decided that people should celebrate Easter, and we have the Gregorian calendar, we have the pagan festivals of the winter solstice and the blessing of the fleet, these sort of festivals, and we have Sunday rather than Sabbath worship. So that which was a memorial for creation was taken away, and so the festival of the sun took its place, and this church took upon it its own authority and instituted it through the state. So those who opposed it were dealt with through the state, and so we have the Inquisition and the horrors of the Dark Ages, in which millions literally died, rotted in prison, were taken to prison, as they tried to do with Luther and Huss and all the reformers, but all the millions of other people who were true to God. It says there in Revelation 17, I saw the woman, the whore, drunk with the blood of martyrs. Time and times, and in particular Sunday, is the mark of Rome's authority. And so we have this image again of Pope Gregory, and we have the dragon underneath, and so he is known for the calendar, and he has the paper crest from his family, emblem of the dragon. The war against Maxentius, so this is in the museum, Vatican Museum, and so his victory marked a change in the tide of events that would affect the world from here on in. That was, after this victory, he would turn his attention to Christianity, but it wasn't pure Christianity that he turned his attention to. Now, when I saw a documentary concerning the Arch of Constantine, the arch you can see back here, and when you get up close, there's no sign of the cross found on the arch at all. So they were looking in this documentary to find any sign of the cross being used, of symbols of Christianity to mark his victory, and there were none. In the early part of the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine issued a decree making Sunday a public festival throughout the Roman Empire. The day the sun was reverenced by his pagan subjects and was honoured by Christians. It was the emperor's policy to unite conflicting interests of heathenism and Christianity. So before that, of course, there had been severe persecution, and Constantine had noted this as he was brought up by the emperor, and he thought to make his empire strong by a melding of the two, of heathenism and Christianity, so that both could observe together the same day, but it's not the day that God instructed. And so we see the church working through festivals, and that which man enjoys, the church has used where it can for its own power. No fewer than 72 such laws made by Constantine and his successors against controversialists and heretics, with many more against Jews, Samaritans and pagans, may be found in the Theodosian Code, and show how diversities of religious opinion were to be prevented and the teachers crushed. So this is like what we might find in countries like Russia or China. It's okay if it's recognised by the state and it's with a Catholic union, but otherwise it was to be crushed and outlawed. But the way religious liberty should be, and the way it will ever be, is that we are learning truth and continuing to progress in the light of truth. Here we have taking upon its own authority that it would take away from the law of God because of wanting to compromise for the sake of power, and it made its own institutions and it made its own assumption, and it changed the law not in one place but in many places, altering it to suit itself. The fourth commandment became the third commandment, and a very brief one at that. Exodus 31, 13 to 18. We must take the Bible in addition, but this gives us an idea concerning signs. Get there in a moment. Verse 16, 31:16. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout the generations as a perpetual covenant. Verse 17. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. If you love me, keep my commandments, I will love you, my Father will love you, and we will manifest ourselves to you. Let's look at 1 Timothy. I've spoken of it, but let's go there. I'm going to put this thing down. So 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 9. Knowing this, that the law is not made for who? A righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for the sinners, for the unholy and profane, for the murderers of fathers, the murderers of mothers, for manslayers, etc. And so it goes through the list. The law is the teacher directing us in the way to go, but the law is not made for the righteous. Why would that be so? Because they have the love of God in their heart. There is no problem in doing that, whatever God has asked them to do. They know God and they love Him. So as we said before, the law can be a measure, and it will be in the final judgment, but there is no one that can sit on the fence. Rome is mixed amongst the nations. The power of the little horn has its influence upon the nations. We're going to see this. In a very powerful way does it have it like this. And it directs the state for its purposes and sends a country's forces into war for its own purpose. And that's the secret to part of its success, is that it is not fighting the battles directly. Often it is having another power that is fighting for it, whereas it maintains its authority over them. It's a transformer beast we're talking about. Is the cartoon type thing they use where this beast transforms from one thing into another and can do all sorts of things. Well, this beast we're talking about is transforming from Babylon into Medo-Persia, into Greece, into Rome, and now into church and state. And now it's going to transform again, and we're going to speak about that. So it's a transformer beast. This is not like the other beasts. The other beasts that I mentioned from the bottomless pit are not transformer beasts, but they are spin-offs from this beast. When I say spin-off, Islam, Muhammad married a nun, had the influence of the church. We have the spin-off of the revolution and atheism from the persecution of the church. It says, and they worshipped the dragon, verse 4, Revelation 13, verse 4. They worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto this beast? Who was able to make war with him? This is how powerful this beast is. We're going to see if it really is that powerful as we go along. The standard of Rome was the dragon. Interesting, they took that standard into battle. The desolating beast of Daniel 7 with its iron teeth, the little horn, Revelation 12, the dragon represents Satan or Lucifer. So we have this image right throughout. The dragon keeps on coming up and up again. St. Peter's, Mary Majora Church in Rome, the dragon. Here the festivals, the solace being celebrated as we do in Christmas, which everybody enjoys, and we have the celebration again. This is on Christmas Eve, and they're having Mass right on Christmas Eve there. That will be at Mary Majora Church in Rome. Tertullian is the first to mention Sunday rest. And in the encyclical, it says this, because the faithful are obliged to attend Mass unless there is a grave impediment, pastors have the corresponding duty to offer everyone the real possibility of fulfilling the precept. Yet more than precept, the observance should be seen as a need rising from the depths of Christian life. It is crucially important that all faithful should be convinced that they cannot live or share their faith fully without attending the Mass. If I could get this, I've lost my mouse here somehow, which is quite annoying. Okay. So we have the image of the sun in the monstrance. One of the monstrance alone would be worth, some of them are probably worth like $50,000 perhaps, some of the old ones, and of course some of them are made of pure gold, and so the symbols are symbols of the sun. Here we have in Villa Estelle, the 16th century villa in Tivoli near Rome, famous for its terraced hillsides. Tivoli has been a popular summer residence since ancient Rome times due to its altitude. So we have here the Pope visiting to the gardens, to this family with the Villa Estate, and when to commemorate him coming to the gardens, we have the dragon. So the dragon over years has collected a lot of moss, but you can see the outline of its head there, and this is to commemorate his coming because it's part of his family emblem. The work began in 1569. In the summer of 1572, he entertained one of the last important guests, which was Pope Gregory VIII, as we've shown in other pictures of him and his tomb, and the dragon in his hand coming from underneath. Revelation 13 and 5 to 7, let's have a look at it. There was given him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemy. Sounds like the little horn power. And power was given unto him to continue 40 and 2 months. It gives us that time. The 1260-year time in which it had its own authority. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God. He shall speak great words against the Most High, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and all that dwell in them. Same language as what was spoken. How long will this power continue? Unto 2,300 days. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. It was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. All that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Now we have in Mark chapter 2, 4-7. So we have the healing of the man in which they uncover the roof and let this man down. It says that he was sick with palsy and he was let down on his bed. And when Christ saw their faith, he said unto the sick with the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were certain of them, scribes, sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, Why does this man thus speak blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but only God? So here is the truth there. And here we have a man forgiving the sins of other men, something not given into their power. And so it is a blasphemous power, speaking great things, of which it has no authority. Here we have an image here, and this is in Peru, Machu Picchu, and the close by city of Cusco. And these are the temples. So on the church would put their structure straight on top of the temple, make it into their own. And the wealth was such that this altar is made of pure 24 karat gold, whereas some would be just cedar overlaid with gold. This was pure gold. And underneath is the original site of the temple. This is in Cusco. Here is the temple of the sun, and on the equinox meaning the Christmas, the sun would come in and hit that spot in the sun temple, come through the window. And so sun worship was the mark of the pagans, and so it was brought also into the church. Here we have the Forum in Rome, and on one side we have the churches, and on the other side we have the pagan structures. So we had, as we mentioned, well, this is the Temple of Jupiter around here, and back here we have the site of the Vestal Virgins. Here, straight on these places, the church would put itself. So paganism became Christianity. We can't see much of the wealth, but we see a little tiny trinket of it, and it would be worth a lot. Say it would come into the head church, John of Lateran, and this is the head church of, says it's the head church of the world, and the monstrance, which would be worth a lot of money, and it had a display of lots of different things from garnets to candlesticks to monstrance. And in St. Peter's it's overlaid with gold, and of course a golden cross that will be back from St. John's of Lateran. And they took the marble directly from old historical sites and paved it on their own places. So even the staircase here, Vatican Museum, made out of marble. So here is where the Christians were tortured for their faith under pagan rule, the abomination of desolation. And later on here, the church comes along and paves its own structures with the wealth that the pagans once held. And so we have the work here of the famous artist, and that's the Mary, the mother with Christ, and the wealth of the arts and all that it has is spoken of in Revelation. Fine linen, this is 18, chapter 18 and verse 16. Thus she was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. So it mentions there all the sorts of different things that make up this. Just going back, it's 18 and verse 12 here. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and of pearls, of fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and all thine wood, and all manner of ivory, and all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and of brass and iron and marble, and cinnamon and odour and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat, and beasts and cattle and horses and chariots and slaves, and the souls of men. And so we have the wealth taken into the church. I'm trying to think of this famous artist here, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Christ. And so the emperors had such power that they could make, the popes had such power that they could make the emperors stand in the snow. This particular empress, they stood in the snow. It was Henry VI, and it was Pope Gregory VII who made him stand there for 3 days barefoot while he would wait for audience with the Pope. Once the Pope had declared an edict against a certain place that would strike fear into the people of that country. They would no longer have faith in their leaders, and so he was seeking pardon or the audience of the Pope there. So we have Bruno, he was executed for saying that the earth was round. Anything that was different to what the sciences were of the day, or what the church said was correct, then he would end up being executed. So that's in Rome. And it started out with the Inquisition being run by the Dominicans. And so from the Dominicans we have the Jesuits who took over. Here we see the first one, the leader, and underneath he is crushing, underneath his foot, on one side a woman with her breast hanging out, on the other side we have him doing the same to a man. Ignatius Loyola is the founder. And here they are inside the church, and Mary with the cross and lightning in her hand. The angel is ripping out their writings from the book, and it's Huss and Luther who she's condemning to hell. Their fight was the counter-revolution against Protestantism. Their organisation started as Protestantism was rising through that which Luther first instigated. Here's what Spurgeon had to say. The condemned were immersed in a bath of slacked lime, gradually filled up to their necks. The lime by little and little enclosed the sufferer or walled them up all alive. The torture was extremely slow. As the lime rose higher and higher, the respiration of the victim became so painful because more difficult. So that, what with the suffocation of the smoke and the anguish of a compressed breathing, they died in a manner most horrible and desperate. Some time after their death, the heads would naturally separate from the bodies and roll away into the hollows left by the shrinking of the line. So Spurgeon gives us a detail of how they treated people. And so you have this occult worship of the dead, something that's totally away from what Christ and his teachings are. And the treatment of people is an abomination. That's why it's called the abomination of desolation. But we have the treatment of people as we come into modern times. We had the situation in Waco where people were, they sent arsenic in the building, and 25 children died by having their bones bent backwards by the pain that they inflicted by sending arsenic gas into that area. We have the treatment of people in this way, something happening at the moment where someone's telling present truth. Well, we're going to sort them out, and we'll use a pretext to make sure we sort them out. And so anything can happen at this point. Any horror can be inflicted. The way might change, but the result and the infliction of inhumanity against another human is still very present. So we have this, it's hard to believe that the monks would spend their time, a lifetime, just amassing and decorating, making their work the decoration of bones. But this is the sort of worship that it is. This is in Rome. Now we have in the Swiss Museum a little bit of the history. So as there was persecution in France and the persecution of the Huguenots, and so they fled that persecution and made their way to Switzerland. It says, however, up to this day, Switzerland also provides shelter to refugees fleeing from political or religious persecution. Well, they've compromised themselves at this time. The first to come were the Huguenots, who settled down mainly in the Protestant cities of the old Swiss Confederacy. In the 19th century, they were followed by the liberal insurgents after the 1848 revolution, in the 12th century by the European Jews, Hungarians, Tibetans, and finally by people seeking refuge from the wars in former Yugoslavia. What I was surprised about, though, was what I considered would be quite a strongly Protestant history, in which the bells were tolling at 4:45 for 15 minutes for people to come to Mass. Here we have the picture of the slaughter, in which it says migration of religious refugees. In the 16th and 17th century, Huguenots, that is French Protestants, faced danger in life and limb at home. Many of them fled to Germany, Holland, England, Ireland, North America and Switzerland. Roughly 200,000 Huguenots settled down permanently in Switzerland, bringing education and prosperity to the Protestant municipalities and cities that gave them shelter. And they established textile mills and clock-making business, and into banking, became master craftsmen. In other words, they become successful entrepreneurs. So they were given that liberty, and so the place would start to prosper. This is the Battle of Saint Bartholomew that occurred in France, in which the king gave permission to slaughter, even though he'd given their word to protect thousands of Protestants. And so we had what it described there, where they would run for refuge. This all happened in one night, this great slaughter. Bodies floating down the Seine River, and absolute disgrace. Meade has calculated from good authorities that in the war with the Albigenses and Waldenses, there perished of these people in France alone 1 million. It's a lot of people. The secret history of papal Rome, the majority of people today, including Roman Catholics, do not know about the true bloody history of the papal Church of Rome. The true history of the Roman Church has been hidden away from the eyes of the masses through the rewriting of history books so they cannot see the truth about what's really happened. But we can also see it in modern wars, such as in Ireland. And so what happens is they keep on fighting gruesome wars. The Pope didn't step in this particular war, but until the people are so exhausted by the bloodshed that they come to a point of compromise, and that's what happened there. This is again in Switzerland. I mentioned there how I was surprised to hear the bells tolling for Mass, for the people to come to Mass. And we have the great reformer Zwingli there, who fought battles for his people and for Protestantism and died with that battle. This here on the plaque here in St. John's of Lateran, where the deadly wound was healed, where a petition was signed. It was signed that Mussolini gave authority back to the papacy. It all happened in this square, but on this church here, it says it in Latin, it's the mother of all churches of the world. Reminds of the words that is written in Revelation 18. Sitteth as the queen. Upon her head was the name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abomination of the earth. Shortly across the way, as you look across the way, so here's the church here, and across the way we have the sacred stairs in which Luther began his pilgrimage as he went to Rome, and he was making his way up the stairs when there was a radical change in his life, in which he would become a soldier for the cross and for the great start of the Reformation movement. Of course, there'd been a movement that had been going on with the Waldenses, the Church in the Wilderness, all through that time, but here was something that was rising from within the church itself. Life is a free gift. On one side we have Protestantism dismissing the law of God, and then we have on the other side the law of God being changed altogether. Life is a free gift. Salvation is that free gift and depends on our relationship with Christ. So to spark the Protestant Reformation, we had the printing of the first book, of course, was the Bible, and before that it was a prohibited book and was burned. But along comes the Jesuit, this one we'll call Peter Canisius, and Peter was sainted for his work as a Jesuit in the Counter-Reformation in Germany. Here we have this place marking the birth, close by the obelisk speaks and is a memorial to Constantine, and this is his baptismal site here. Not the real one, but the one they place as a memorial of his baptism. So here we have codified law of Justinian, Roman law during all those centuries until 1798, which gave the papacy its authority, and then the Code of Napoleon became the law to take away the authority, and that was bill dated in February 15, 1798, giving the exact time of the 1260 years of its rule. So we have at St. John's Lateran Square This is where this famous signature, where world history will be changed, because it would rise again to be a persecuting power in the future. So this is the background leading up to the end time scenario, to the end game. The media commentators were once again busy speculating on what themes the Holy Father would emphasise. I'm surprised that no one, at least no one who I have seen, has put a clock on all the pontiff's speeches to list the minutes, the seconds, give it to climate change, immigration, religious liberty. Notice that, religious liberty, all these things that are being mentioned here, marriage and the defence of life. Pope Francis met with the United Nations in a fractured world, as if he was putting it back together again for us, but they were the ones of the Protestant Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, to fight Protestantism, as we've just seen, to fight the truth of God. It says there, and all that dwell in the world, earth shall worship him. This is in verse 8 of chapter 13. Shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of life, of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. Listen, it's saying, pay attention. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. Here is the patience and faith of the saints, because they endure this persecution through this time and are faithful to God. But it makes them knights and soldiers in God's kingdom and saved for eternity. So we have these three powers. The Church of Rome, the most powerful. There is atheism, the offspring that come from the Reformation, the Revolution, the French Revolution, and we also have this spin-off as Islam. The engines of destruction, which the devil was behind, he brought them from the bottomless pit, and they were to wage war and confusion across the world. Today we're in a three-way battle, as we mentioned, by those three powers, pointing to the time of world dominance when it says that all the world wandered after the beast in Revelation 13. It's not just talking about that which is past, it's actually talking about the future. The future is coming. As it eradicates its opponents on the world stage, only one remains. Only one opponent remains. So it fights against these other powers, the other powers of Islam, the other powers of atheism or communism. There's a battle against those powers until only one remains to have a voice against it. What is that one? The one Church of God, who keeps the commandments of God and has the faith of Jesus and points out the sins of Babylon. It ruled for more than 1260 years, but not absolutely, and not a single world religion. But it's coming up to that very point. That's what it's aiming for. The deadly wound was healed, and all the world wandered after the beast. So this is the time it's pointing forward to. So we have the background there. And you shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be as ashes under your feet, the soles of your feet in the day that I will do this, saith the Lord of hosts. So the time will come, it says in Malachi, that the wicked shall be as ashes underneath the feet of God's saints. And it's not that we want that, but it's the reality of what will happen. They look to destroy God's people, and God's people will triumph because heaven is their majority. And heaven is out for their life and for their salvation. Revelation 13 is talking about the days in which we live. We've given a little bit of background here, but special attention is given to the 10-horned beast of the three that come from the bottomless pit. That abomination of desolation. 7 times is the prophecy given of this power, that we take note of it. Our future belongs in embracing the truth. We have no future without it. We need to be on God's side. We need to understand who the opponents are and what is necessary that we might grab hold of eternal life. We will keep on going in the next section to look at modern day events, what is happening around us, and there's so many we can't even keep up to it. But it's happening from every side. There's deceptions on all sides as we come to the very climax of this world's history. Father, we pray for your protection, deliver us from evil, be to us a friend, and be our God, that you might make a way as you did for the children of Israel as they come out of Egypt, that we will be found in your kingdom and saved and be grown into your person you would have us to be, to reflect the glory that you have in your character that was given to your Son, that it might be given to us, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.